when my 8-year-old sister asked why animals tasted better when they were scared. First, I started following her and found her torturing neighborhood pets in our garage, so I spent 10 years covering up her escalating experiments until she poisoned her college friends at a dinner party. And when I finally tried to tell our mom the truth, she'd already planted evidence framing me as the sicko. So mom kicked me out believing I was a monster until my sister revealed her true nature in court while laughing about how the animals trusted her right until the end. When my little sister was 8, she asked why animals tasted better when they were scared first. From there, 13-year-old me had a gut feeling that something was off, and I was right. It started small. I'd find her playing with insects, pulling wings off flies and keeping them in jars to watch them struggle. Then came the neighbor's hamster that mysteriously died during a sleepover. She cried so convincingly that everyone comforted her, but I'd seen her practicing those tears in the mirror the night before. By the time she was 11, I caught her in the garage with a stray cat and a set of kitchen knives. The look of pure fascination on her face as the animal cowered still haunts me. I managed to chase the cat away and told her I'd tell mom if she ever did it again. She just tilted her head and asked, "But don't you want to know what the insides look like when they're still moving?" That night, I installed a lock on the garage and started sleeping with my door locked too. A few years later, we were at a family barbecue when she accidentally served everyone burgers she'd made herself. 3 people got violently ill, and when I checked her cooler, I found meat from animals that had clearly been tortured. The cuts were all wrong, with evidence of anti-mortem wounds. The meat was labeled with dates and what looked like pain ratings. I had to convince everyone it was just spoiled beef and threw everything out before anyone looked too close. I was fully planning on telling our mom the full truth, but as soon as she was back from her double shift, she crashed on the kitchen floor and burst into tears because of how stressful work was. She'd just lost her second job and was talking about having to pull my sister out of her specialized art program. Our mom was working 60-hour weeks, and the last thing I wanted was for her to worry about something that I thought I could fix. That decision ruined my life. I turned down 2 scholarships, including a full ride to Cornell. I broke up with Jamie after 3 years together because I couldn't explain why I had to rush home one night. My sister had texted me a photo of roadkill with the message, "Practicing for something bigger." I basically became a third parent, installing hidden cameras, monitoring her internet history, following her to friends' houses. At 14, she was caught with biological specimens in her school locker. The vice principal's face had gone pale when he opened it. Rows of small containers, each holding something preserved in murky fluid. I told them they were for my science project and got suspended. That same year, I found her journal. Pages and pages of detailed drawings showing her experiments, rating systems for different methods. I burned it in the backyard while she watched from her window, smiling. When she was 16, the neighbor's pets started disappearing. I spent $3,000 finding them and returning them before anyone connected it to her. I'd follow her at night, tracking her to abandoned buildings where she'd set up what she called her workshop. The German Shepherd I found there still won't go outside after dark. Then came the incident with the veterinary clinic. She'd volunteered there for exactly 1 week before they called the police about missing controlled substances and suspicious deaths among the boarded animals. I convinced them she was covering for her boyfriend, a troubled kid from school who conveniently disappeared around the same time. I never asked her what she did with the body. I didn't want to know. But when she was 18, she crossed a line even I couldn't cover up. She hosted a dinner party while mom was working, serving her college friends her special recipe. She'd been preparing for weeks, documenting everything. One guest ended up in the hospital with severe poisoning from stress hormones and bacteria. The doctors found compounds in his system that shouldn't exist in normal meat. Only bureaucratic incompetence and assumed lab errors prevented a full investigation. That night, I told her I was done. I was telling mom everything, but she hit me to it, sitting at our kitchen table with fake tears, spinning tales about how I'd forced her to keep quiet about my sick hobbies. She'd planted evidence throughout my room, photos, tools, even a forged diary. She'd been planning this for years, keeping an insurance policy against me. My mom believed every word. The look of horror and disgust on her face broke something inside me. "How could you?" she whispered, backing away like I was a monster. 10 years of sacrifice, and I was the villain in her eyes. I packed in silence while my sister watched from the doorway. "It wasn't personal," she said quietly. "I just needed someone to take the fall eventually. You were always so eager to help." Then she smiled and offered me some leftovers from her dinner party, describing exactly how she'd prepared them. My stomach turned as she detailed her tenderizing process. I gave my mom one last chance to hear the truth. She told me I was disgusting and to get the F out of her face. She'd already called the extended family, warning them about me. It's been a month since then. I have my own apartment now, far from home, but I'm not done. I'm telling my family the truth, and my sister will rot in hell when I do. I knew exactly where to start. The old laptop I'd kept hidden in storage had everything. Screenshots of her online activity, photos of her workshops, even audio recordings from the hidden cameras I'd installed. For years, I documented everything, thinking I was protecting her from herself. Now that evidence would be her undoing. The first person I contacted was Aunt Sarah. She'd always been the voice of reason in our family, the one who asked uncomfortable questions when everyone else looked away. I drove to her house at dawn, catching her watering her garden before work. She barely glanced up when I approached. Mom had clearly done her damage control well, but I came prepared. I pulled out the laptop and showed her the folder labeled 2019 Veterinary Clinic. Her face changed as she scrolled through the photos, syringes arranged in neat rows, detailed notes about dosages, timestamps showing my sister entering the clinic after hours. Aunt Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She remembered that week, how the clinic had nearly shut down, how 3 animals had died under mysterious circumstances. She'd even donated to their fundraiser afterward. The pieces were clicking into place. Next was Uncle Marcus. He'd lost his prize-winning German Shepherd 2 years ago, found it days later cowering in his garage, refusing to eat. The vet said it showed signs of extreme trauma, but couldn't explain the precise pattern of injuries. I showed him the journal pages I'd photographed before burning the original. My sister's detailed drawings of a German Shepherd, notes about fear responses, and optimal pressure points. His face went white. He grabbed the photos, studying them with growing horror. The dates matched. The descriptions were too specific to be coincidence. He asked why I hadn't said anything then. I explained about Mom's job loss, the threats of losing the house, how I thought I could contain it. He didn't speak to me after that, just stared at the evidence with hollow eyes. The family group chat started buzzing that afternoon. Mom had sent another message warning everyone about my manipulative tactics and forged evidence, but doubt was creeping in. Cousin Janet mentioned how her cat had gone missing during my sister's visit last year. Another cousin recalled finding strange marks on his rabbit after my sister babysat. My sister wasn't idle during this time. She called me repeatedly, leaving voicemails emails that ranged from tearful pleas to veiled threats. She knew exactly what buttons to push, reminding me how I'd failed to protect those animals, how I was complicit in everything she'd done. She even sent photos of herself volunteering at the animal shelter, surrounded by happy dogs, knowing it would torment me. I decided to visit our old neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Her hamster had been the first casualty I'd witnessed. She invited me in reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable. But when I showed her the practice videos my sister had made, footage of her rehearsing her crying performance, something shifted. Mrs. Chen remembered finding my sister in her daughter's room that night, standing over the hamster cage in the dark. The momentum was building, but my sister adapted quickly. She posted on social media about her struggles with a disturbed sibling who'd always been jealous of her success. She shared childhood photos of us, carefully curated to show her as the victim, pictures where I looked angry or distant, conveniently cropped to remove context. Her college friends rallied around her, sharing the posts with sympathetic comments. She was particularly clever about the evidence. She claimed I'd been the one with access to her computer, that I'd planted those files to frame her. She even filed a police report about identity theft, creating an official record of her accusations. The officer who took the report was sympathetic, a young woman who'd clearly been charmed by my sister's performance. I had to be smarter. I reached out to Dr. Peterson, the veterinarian who'd investigated the clinic incident. He'd been haunted by those deaths, unable to explain the sophisticated knowledge required to cause such specific organ failures. I showed him my sister's chemistry notes from high school. She'd written a paper on neurotoxins that had disturbed her teacher enough to call home. Mom had dismissed it as intellectual curiosity. Dr. Peterson agreed to speak with Uncle Marcus. Their combined testimony would carry weight, but my sister must have been monitoring my movements. The next day, Dr. Peterson's clinic was vandalized. Liar, spray painted across the windows. Security footage mysteriously corrupted. My sister had an alibi. She'd been at a study group. 5 witnesses confirmed. The extended family was fracturing. Something feels off about how the OP kept covering for their sister all these years while collecting evidence at the same time. Some believed me, others thought I was orchestrating an elaborate revenge plot. Mom remained firmly in my sister's camp, posting increasingly hostile messages about my betrayal. She'd found a therapist who validated her belief that I was the disturbed one, projecting my issues onto my innocent sister. I knew I needed something undeniable. The dinner party incident was my best shot. There had to be records somewhere. I spent days at the library, searching through old newspapers, hospital admission records, anything that might corroborate what happened. My sister had been careful, but not perfect. I found it in a food safety bulletin, a warning about improperly stored meat causing unusual symptoms in several college students. The date matched. The symptoms described were consistent with consuming stress hormones and adrenaline. One student had posted about it on Reddit years ago, describing the host as a sweet girl who seemed genuinely upset about the mix-up. But my sister had anticipated this too. She'd already crafted a story about buying discount meat from a sketchy supplier, how she'd been too embarrassed to admit it at the time. She even produced receipts, forged, but convincing enough. She played the naive college student perfectly, garnering sympathy from those who wanted to believe her. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My ex, Jamie, reached out after hearing about the family drama. That night I'd rushed home when my sister had sent the roadkill photo. Jamie had been with me, had seen the message, had watched me race back, terrified of what I might find. Jamie had kept screenshots, thinking they might be evidence if something serious happened. Those screenshots included metadata, proof that my sister had sent those messages from her phone at specific times. It was harder to explain away than her other lies, but she tried, claiming her phone had been hacked, that someone was setting her up. The story grew more elaborate with each telling. I compiled everything into a comprehensive timeline. Every incident, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. It painted a clear picture of escalation, from insects to small animals to pets to people. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. I made copies for every family member, delivered them personally to ensure they couldn't be intercepted. My sister's response was swift and vicious. She accused me of stalking her, filed for a restraining order. She claimed I'd been obsessed with her since childhood, that my protective behavior was actually control. She had her own timeline. Every time I'd followed her, every camera I'd installed, every boundary I'd crossed in my attempts to monitor her. Out of context, it looked damning. The hearing was set for next month. She'd hired a lawyer, a sharp woman who specialized in sibling abuse cases. I couldn't afford representation, would have to defend myself. My sister sat in the courtroom looking fragile and frightened, the perfect victim. She'd lost weight, styled herself to appear younger, vulnerable, but I had one advantage she didn't expect. All those years of covering for her had taught me her patterns, her tells. I knew exactly how she operated, how she manipulated situations, and I was learning to use her own methods against her. The game was far from over. As I prepared my defense, more family members reached out privately. They'd noticed things over the years, small cruelties, missing items, pets that behaved strangely after she visited. The coalition was growing, but quietly. Everyone was afraid of becoming her next target. My mother remained unmoved. She'd invested too much in her narrative of me as the problem child. Admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that she'd failed to protect countless victims, that she'd enabled a monster. It was easier to maintain the lie, to cast me as the villain, but I wasn't giving up. I had 10 years of evidence and a growing network of people who'd finally started seeing the truth. My sister had won the first round, but the fight was just beginning. Every move she made, I documented. Every lie she told, I countered with facts. The real test would come at the hearing. She'd have to maintain her performance under oath, answer specific questions about documented incidents. I'd spent years watching her lie convincingly, but legal scrutiny was different. There would be records to verify, timelines to confirm, witnesses to question. I knew she was preparing too, coaching her witnesses, refining her story. She'd probably accuse me of fabricating evidence, claim I had the technical skills to forge documents and manipulate photos. It would come down to credibility, the devoted sister trying to protect her family versus the disturbed sibling with an obsession. But I had something she didn't expect. Dr. Peterson had kept samples from the clinic incident, stored in his personal freezer. He'd never tested them thoroughly, haunted by the case but lacking resources. Now, with proper motivation, he'd sent them to a specialized lab. The results would take weeks, but they could provide scientific proof of what she'd done. My sister must have sensed the walls closing in. Her behavior grew more erratic, her stories more elaborate. She started making mistakes, contradicting herself in social media posts, alienating supporters with increasingly aggressive responses to questions. The mask was slipping. I watched from my apartment window as an unfamiliar car pulled up outside. My sister stepped out, dressed in business attire I'd never seen her wear before. She carried a briefcase and walked with purpose toward my building. My blood ran cold. She'd found my address. The doorbell doorbell rang 3 times before I answered. She stood there with tears streaming down her face, mascara running in perfect lines. Behind her stood 2 people I recognized from her social media posts, college friends who'd been defending her online. They looked concerned, protective even. She'd brought witnesses to whatever performance she was about to give. I blocked the doorway, but she pushed past me, her friends following. They sat on my couch uninvited while she pulled documents from her briefcase, medical records, therapy notes, prescription bottles. She'd been seeing a psychiatrist, she explained between sobs. The trauma of living with an abusive sibling had taken its toll. The papers showed diagnoses of PTSD, anxiety, depression, all dated within the last month, all citing me as the source of her trauma. Her friends rubbed her back, shot me disgusted looks. One of them started recording on her phone. I realized this was all staged. The tears, the timing, the documentation. She was building her case, creating evidence of my continued harassment by showing up at my apartment, seeking closure. After they left, I found a USB drive wedged between my couch cushions. No accident. She'd wanted me to find it. The drive contained photos of me taken over the past month. Me at the grocery store, at work, meeting with family members. Timestamps showed some were taken when she claimed to be in therapy sessions. She was establishing proof that I was the one doing the stalking. I drove to Aunt Sarah's house immediately. She answered the door but kept the chain on, peering at me through the gap. Behind her, I glimpsed my sister's jacket on the coat rack. She'd gotten there first. Aunt Sarah's expression had changed from the tentative belief I'd seen before to something harder, more suspicious. She told me to leave, that she'd call the police if I didn't. As I walked back to my car, I saw my sister watching from an upstairs window, a small smile playing on her lips. The pattern continued over the following days. Every family member I'd been making progress with suddenly became unreachable. Phones went unanswered, doors stayed locked. My sister had made her rounds, armed with her psychiatric papers and practiced tears. She'd even created a support group online for survivors of sibling abuse, populated with fake accounts sharing stories that mirrored her fabricated narrative about me. I discovered she'd been busier than I'd realized. A background check on myself revealed inquiries from potential employers I'd never applied to. She'd been submitting job applications in my name to companies that worked with children and animals, attaching a resume that highlighted my experience with biological specimens and behavioral modification techniques. The language was carefully chosen to raise red flags without being explicitly incriminating. Dr. Peterson called me late one evening. His voice was strained. The lab had received the samples but claimed they'd been contaminated during storage. The results were unusable. He suspected tampering but couldn't prove it. Worse, someone had filed a complaint with the veterinary board about his unprofessional involvement in a family dispute. His license was under review. He couldn't help me anymore. My sister's next move was crueler. She started volunteering at the animal shelter where she'd been photographed, becoming their star volunteer. She organized fundraisers, spent hours caring for the animals, documented everything on social media. The shelter director praised her dedication in a local newsletter. The contrast to the narrative I was trying to establish was devastating. I tried reaching out to the college student who'd posted on Reddit about the dinner party. The account had been deleted. When I tracked down his real name through old screenshots, I found his social media full of posts about false memories and the danger of suggested recollections. He'd been convinced that his illness that night was food poisoning, nothing more. My sister had gotten to him too. The restraining order hearing approached faster than I was ready for. Sister shows up crying with witnesses and therapy papers claiming trauma from her abusive sibling. That's some next level chess playing. She turned the investigation into her own evidence factory. I spent nights organizing my evidence, creating presentations that clearly showed the timeline of events, but doubt crept in. How could I prove she'd planted that USB drive? How could I explain following her all those years without sounding obsessed? Every piece of evidence I had could be twisted to support her narrative instead of mine. She escalated her psychological warfare. I started receiving packages at work, animal anatomy textbooks, taxidermy supplies, books about serial killers, all ordered with prepaid cards, untraceable. My coworkers began giving me strange looks. My supervisor called me in for a meeting about concerning deliveries to the workplace. I couldn't explain without sounding paranoid. One morning, I found my car tires slashed. Security footage from my apartment complex showed a figure in a hoodie, face obscured. The build could have been anyone, but I knew. The cuts were precise, methodical, just deep enough to cause slow leaks that would leave me stranded at the worst possible moment. It was her signature, that calculated cruelty. I decided to take a risk. If she was monitoring me, I'd use that against her. I made obvious preparations to visit our childhood home while Mom was at work, making sure to stop at a storage facility first, where I made a show of retrieving boxes labeled Evidence 2015 to 2017. I wanted her to follow me, to try to intercept whatever she thought I'd found. The house was empty when I arrived, but I wasn't alone for long. I heard the back door open, footsteps moving carefully through the kitchen. I waited in my old room, camera ready, but when the door opened, it wasn't my sister. It was Mom, home early from work. Her face was cold, furious. She demanded to know why I was there, accused me of breaking in. Behind her, I saw my sister's car pulling into the driveway. She'd called Mom, told her I was burglarizing the house. The confrontation was ugly. Mom threatened to call the police. I tried showing her the staged evidence of my sister's manipulation, but she wouldn't look. My sister arrived playing the concerned daughter, comforting Mom while shooting me triumphant glances. She'd turned our childhood home into enemy territory. That night, exhausted and defeated, I almost gave up. The hearing was in 3 days, and I had nothing concrete. Every move I made, she countered. Every ally I gained, she turned. I was playing chess against someone who'd been planning this game for years, while I'd been playing checkers. Jamie called unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken since I'd shown the screenshots. Jamie's voice was careful, measured. There was something I needed to know. After we'd broken up, Jamie had stayed in touch with some mutual friends. One of them had dated my sister briefly in college. He'd ended things abruptly after what he called a disturbing incident, but had never elaborated. Jamie had reached out to him. The story he told was chilling. During their relationship, my sister had suggested they experiment with food. She'd prepared special meals, insisting he try them. He'd gotten sick repeatedly, but she'd convinced him he just had a sensitive stomach until he'd found her notebook. Pages of observations about reactions to different substances mixed into his food. Detailed notes about his physical responses. Optimal dosages for nausea versus cramping. The final entry described plans for something she called the ultimate test. He'd packed his things that night and never looked back. Jamie forwarded me his contact information. The timing was perfect, 2 days before the hearing. I drove to meet him at a coffee shop 3 towns over. His hands shook as he handed me photocopies of the notebook pages he'd kept. He'd been too scared to come forward before, worried no one would believe him, but hearing about my situation had given him courage. The notebook notebook pages were damning. My sister's handwriting, her distinctive way of drawing diagrams. But more importantly, they showed progression. The same methodical escalation I'd witnessed, but with human subjects. The dates aligned with her college years, filling in gaps I hadn't even known existed. That evening, I received an unexpected call from the animal shelter director. My sister had been acting strangely during her volunteer shift. She'd been found in the medical supply room after hours, reorganizing medications. When questioned, she'd become defensive, accusing staff of persecution. The director wanted to know if there was anything she should be aware of. I made a calculated decision. I drove to the shelter and showed the director select evidence, just enough to raise concerns without seeming vindictive. The director's expression shifted from skepticism to alarm as she recognized behavioral patterns she'd dismissed as quirks. She agreed to install additional security cameras in sensitive areas. The night before the hearing, my sister made her biggest mistake yet. She showed up at Jamie's apartment, somehow having discovered our renewed contact. Jamie texted me immediately, and I rushed over, arriving just as my sister was leaving. She'd tried to convince Jamie that I was dangerous, that reconnecting with me was a mistake, but she'd pushed too hard, her mask slipping as she described in detail what she'd do if Jamie testified against her. Jamie was shaken, but resolute. We spent the night preparing a statement, documenting the threats. Jamie also revealed something crucial. During our relationship, there had been other incidents, times when I'd rushed home for emergencies that Jamie had witnessed, photos from social gatherings where my sister's behavior had seemed off. Jamie had kept everything, sensing someday it might matter. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and humid. I dressed carefully, organized my evidence into clear folders. My hands were steady despite the churning in my stomach. This was it, 10 years of protection, manipulation, and sacrifice culminating in this moment. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. My sister sat with her lawyer, wearing a pale pink dress that made her look impossibly young and innocent. Mom sat behind her, glaring at me with undisguised hostility. But I noticed others in the gallery. Aunt Sarah, Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Chen, even Dr. Peterson had come, despite the risk to his license. The proceedings began with my sister's lawyer painting me as an obsessed sibling who'd stalked and harassed her client for years. The evidence my sister had manufactured was presented methodically. The photos, the fake job applications, the testimony from her therapy sessions. It was compelling, professionally orchestrated. When my turn came to present evidence, I started with the oldest documentation, the hidden camera footage from when she was 14, the journal pages I'd photographed. My sister's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed it, noting the clear timestamps and metadata. I kept my presentation clinical, factual, letting the evidence speak for itself. Then came the unexpected allies. Jamie testified about the roadkill photo, the pattern of emergencies. The college friend presented the notebook pages, his voice cracking as he described finding them. Mrs. Chen talked about her hamster, how she'd found my sister in her daughter's room. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern. My sister maintained her composure initially, shaking her head sadly at each accusation. But as the evidence mounted, something shifted. When the shelter director testified about finding her in the medical supply room, my sister's hands clenched into fists. When Dr. Peterson described the clinic incidents, she began muttering under her breath. The breaking point came when I presented the timeline. Every incident, every cover-up, every escalation mapped out chronologically. The judge studied it carefully, asking pointed questions about specific dates and incidents. My sister's lawyer tried to intervene, but my sister suddenly stood up. What followed wasn't the dramatic confession I'd imagined. Instead, she launched into a cold, calculated dismantling of each witness. She described Jamie's mental instability, the college friend's substance problems, Mrs. Chen's senility. But her tone was wrong, too clinical, too pleased with herself. She began describing how easy it had been to manipulate each of them, how stupid they were for not seeing her brilliance sooner. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she shoved the woman aside. She turned to me, eyes glittering with something inhuman. She detailed every moment she'd orchestrated, every time she'd watched me scramble to cover for her. She seemed to have forgotten where we were, lost in her own narrative of superiority. The judge called for order, but my sister kept going. She described the veterinary clinic incident in detail, laughing about how the animals had trusted her right until the end. She explained her tenderizing process from the dinner party, the exact compounds she'd used. The court reporter's face had gone pale. Mom's expression was what I watched most closely. The hostile certainty crumbled with each word my sister spoke. When my sister described planting evidence in my room, planning for years to frame me, Mom's hand went to her mouth. The moment my sister laughed about my pathetic need to protect everyone, Mom broke. The sob that escaped her echoed through the courtroom. The judge had heard enough. The restraining order was denied, but more importantly, she recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation for my sister. Security officers moved to escort her out, but she wasn't finished. She turned to the gallery, addressing her audience like a professor giving a lecture. She explained how society's rules were for lesser minds, how she transcended basic morality through superior intellect. As they led her away, she looked directly at me. No anger, no hatred, just mild disappointment that I'd finally won around. She mentioned something about starting over somewhere new, finding better subjects who wouldn't disappoint her. The doors closed behind her, but her voice echoed in the sudden silence. The aftermath was swift. The shelter banned her immediately. Her college friends, having witnessed her courtroom performance, flooded social media with retractions of their support. The fake support group she'd created was reported and shut down. Family members who doubted me reached out with apologies and horror stories they'd previously dismissed. Mom approached me outside the courthouse. She looked older, fragmented. She tried to speak several times before managing to ask how long I'd known. When I told her, since my sister was 8, she crumpled onto the courthouse steps. I sat beside her as she processed 10 years of willful blindness. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, she asked for the full truth. Over the following hours, I told her everything, every incident, every cover-up, every sacrifice. She listened without interrupting, tears streaming silently. When I finished, she pulled out her phone and began making calls to therapists, to family members, to anyone who needed to know the truth about her daughter. The psychiatric evaluation revealed what I'd always suspected. My sister showed clear signs of antisocial personality disorder with sadistic features. The recommendation was long-term institutional treatment. She was placed in a secure facility specializing in personality disorders, though the doctors warned us that true change was unlikely. I visited her once, 3 months later. She sat across from me in the visiting room, looking smaller somehow. She didn't apologize or show remorse. Instead, she critiqued my strategy during the hearing, pointing out where I could have been more efficient. When visiting hours ended, she mentioned she'd been studying the other patients, finding their behavioral patterns fascinating. I left knowing I'd never return. The family slowly rebuilt around the truth. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged salvaged. Too much damage, too many lies. But others grew stronger. Aunt Sarah became a fierce advocate for mental health awareness. Uncle Marcus started volunteering at animal shelters, honoring the pets who'd suffered. Mom threw herself into therapy, working to understand how she'd missed so much. As for me, I finally started living my own life. I reached out to Cornell, explaining my situation. While they couldn't restore my scholarship, they offered guidance on reapplying. I reconnected with Jamie, not romantically, but as someone who'd witnessed the truth when no one else had. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, began untangling 10 years of hypervigilance and misplaced responsibility. 6 months after the hearing, I received a letter from the facility. My sister had been caught attempting to manipulate newer patients, documenting their responses to various psychological pressures. Her privileges were revoked, her treatment plan intensified. The doctor writing the letter thanked me for the comprehensive history I'd provided. It had helped them anticipate her behaviors. I kept the letter, but didn't dwell on it. My sister was no longer my responsibility. The animals were safe. The family knew the truth. I'd spent 10 years in her shadow, sacrificing everything to contain her darkness. Now, finally, I could step into my own light. The nightmares still came sometimes, memories of her cold eyes and calculated cruelty. But each day got easier. Each choice became more my own. My life wasn't perfect. Trauma doesn't vanish overnight, but it was mine, built on truth rather than lies. And that, after everything, was enough. I hope you have a wonderful day filled with 0 family members who need constant supervision. I'll see you in the next one.